are in Carnac in Brittany, and I've come here because I wanted to show you a place where a film has originated, namely Fitzcarraldo. I was looking for a windswept coastline. I stayed here just wondering, how, for God's sake, did they do it 5,000 years ago? It's a miracle. Just unbelievable. If you give me 2,000 men, maybe 3,000 men, and give me, let's say 1 year or 2 years, I'm gonna move you a stone, which may be even much bigger than those here, let's say 30 feet high, maybe 150 tons heavy, over 2 miles over land, and I would erect it. But with Stone Age technology, maybe I could show you on the ground. Most of the time it would take to build a ramp. Let's say this is the ground. I would build a ramp, let's say over 1 mile or even more. And this ramp would end up in an artificial hill like that here. And I would have a hole in it like a crater. And then I would move the slab. Well, let's suppose we have the slab. I would dig under it and put heavy trunks of oak under it and dig all the earth away so it would be on cylinders rolling. And with huge levers, I would just move it forward inch by inch by inch until it reaches this artificial hill and drops into this crater hole, and it would be erect. Somehow that has been the basic idea for Fitzcarraldo. I kept wondering, how do I move a huge steamboat across a mountain? Train races through the land, its wheels are glowing. One car erupts in flames. The train moves, it moves into fathomless space, unwavering. In the pitch blackness of the universe, the wheels are glowing, the lone car is glowing. Unimaginable stellar catastrophes take place. Entire worlds collapse into a single spot. Light can no longer escape. Even the profoundest blackness would seem like light, and the silence would seem like thunder. The universe is filled with nothing. It is a yawning black void. Systems of the Milky Ways have condensed into unstars. Utter blissfulness is spreading, and out of utter blissfulness now springs absurdity. This is the situation. Is the loneliness good? Yes, it is. There are only dramatic vistas ahead. The festering rankness, spelled with a capital R, the festering rankness, meanwhile, gathers once again at sea. I wrote that when I walked over the hills of the Black Forest, when I walked from Munich to Paris once. It's quite strange how fantasy works and how things come out, all the nonsense and all the visions. It's not only a way to move ahead, walking over the country. I think all the essential things for our existence we should do on foot. Could explain it in such a way that if you live in England and you have your girlfriend in Sicily, and for years it is clear that you want to marry her, and for her it's obvious, and it would take you a phone call to have her fly to England, or you would fly to Sicily, you shouldn't fly. If I would marry again, I would walk all the way from London to Sicily. Even if I was dead sure that it was obvious that we would live our lives together and have children together, I would walk there, knock on the door, and say, now this is it, I would like to live together with you. And that's what I say by existential importance for certain things. You should not go by train or by aeroplanes anymore. Train isn't that bad, but in questions of life or death, one should walk. You know that I walked because Lotte Eisner was critically ill, and somehow everything protested inside of me, and it was almost like a pilgrimage that I did. And I knew if I came on foot, she would be out of hospital. And I knew if I did not walk up against it, she would die. You are the only and last living being on this earth who has met and seen and lived through all of cinema that is in existence since its first hour of birth. You knew Méliès, the magician.
Yes.
I mean, later he did his films in
yeah.
1904, 05, 06. But you knew all of them, every single one who was in cinema and had importance, and they all...
Yes, I knew Eisenstein and Pudovkin, and later on Stroheim, Sternberg, and of course all the Germans, and still in Germany. And then I saw Fritz Lang, of course, back in the States.
And the next generation, of course, and now my generation.
Yes.
You know that I rigorously and categorically forbade you to die about 8 years ago when I marched from Munich to Paris, just to prevent. I did this pilgrimage, and I've said now, well, you've got the permission to die now. To explain a little bit, you have been somehow the consciousness of the new German cinema. We are a fatherless generation, somehow orphans, because the barbarism of the Third Reich has disrupted the continuity of filmmaking. There was a void, a gap of almost a quarter of a century, and you have bridged the gap for us to the great filmmaking in the 20s of the Expressionist epoch. And more important so, my feeling is that there was no legitimate German culture anymore, not in film or anywhere. And your authority and your declarations has given us legitimacy. And only that has opened us the gate to audiences outside of Germany.
Yes, I was very happy when I saw your first film. And
that of Schlöndorff, for example, as
yes,
well. Yeah.
Schlöndorff.
The Junge Törles.
Yes, I thought with Schlöndorff's film, well, that's French influence, and he had lived quite long in France. But when I saw your Sign of Life, I said, that's a real German film, and that's something for me. And I was very happy because I knew it was after a modern version of Achim von Arnim. Yeah. And I liked always the romantic writers. And so I was very happy to see it and wrote to Fritz Lang. Fritz, I'm so happy Germany gets good films again.
Yeah. Yes, I belong to this culture, and you belong to this culture as well.
That's true. Yeah. It was very funny when I read that Heine poem again, that I had once a beautiful fatherland.
Yeah, and it was a dream.
And it was a dream.
In filmmaking, you deal with collective dreams. Aguirre is driven by insanity and quest for power, of course, but he's the first real rebel against the Spanish crown and even against God.
Dann ist einer der Männer in Panik geraten wegen der verdammten Stille, die immer dann kommt, wenn es wieder einen erwischt.
Ich gehe lieber zu den Indianern, als bei diesem total Verrückten da zu bleiben.
Der Mann ist einen Kopf größer als ich. Das kann sich ändern.
La, 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 la. La, 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 la.
Ich erkläre dir meinen Plan. Ich habe die Flussbiegungen gezählt. Schau, ich habe hier eine Karte in den Sand gezeichnet. Wir brauchen etwa einen Tag für jede Biegung. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Wenn ich Aguirre will, dass die Vögel tot von den Bäumen fallen, dann fallen die Vögel tot von den Bäumen herunter. Ich bin der Zorn Gottes.
My films are not historical. It doesn't matter whether they are taking place in some past time during, let's say, a Spanish conquista of Latin America in the Amazon jungle. Hamlet is a story that took place 100 years before Shakespeare's time, and yet it still is a drama of our time. It still has to do with us. This town was the end of the world for me. This is Aschau. And back there's a ski ramp where I used to jump, but I never got out of this valley. At this waterfall behind the house where I grew up, I spent a lot of my childhood. We always caught trout in this creek. I used to dream and sit and watch the water. And one has to know that at the end of Second World War, this whole area here was the very last pocket that was not occupied by any foreign force. So finally the Americans came, but before they came, SS men and werewolves and all these people just fled into the mountains, and they hid their rifles and submachine guns and grenades under these rocks here. And years after the war, we still would find pistols and whatever, and we would shoot crows with submachine guns when we were 5 years old. All the key figures in my films are very close to my heart. I would never be able to make a film about a person whom I would not really like very much. Even Aguirre, I'm not against him. And Steiner is one of the very close ones because I wanted to become world champion of ski flyers. Now I know I would never have made it, but I still would like this idea that I'm just close behind him with my breath in his neck. When I was 3 years old on Santa Claus Day, Santa Claus came to the house at night, and he's accompanied here in Bavaria by a figure called Krampus, which is some sort of devil demon with chains and a whip who punishes the bad children. And I was really in sheer terror, and I fled under the sofa and peed my pants, and I was dragged out, and all of a sudden the door opened, and I saw a man coming in, and it was God. And God wore a brown overall. And I knew it was God, and he looked at me and he smiled at me. Years later, my parents told me that apparently it was a man who actually worked here. That's the place where God used to work. It was a small power plant, an electrical plant, and he had worked there. Now it doesn't exist anymore. But I truly have seen God. I'm still convinced. He was well shaven, but had oily hands and a brown overall. And I think he had no socks, even though there was winter. I've been filming everywhere in South America or the Sahara, but somehow I belong to here, to this place. They speak a very strange Bavarian dialect here. My own father wouldn't even understand me. As children, we had our great heroes, and the greatest of all was Hans. He was a young, strong man in the village. He used to be a lumberjack out in the forest. And as he had worked so hard, he had muscles like a bodybuilder. It's an amazing man who rode a motorcycle on these small country roads, and he would dash into the forest, and each week he had an accident, and he was our great hero. And one day, Bene, who used to live in the house where I grew up, was the strongest man in the village. He was strong like an oak tree. And for about 1.5 or 2 years, Hans challenged him into a fight. And they wouldn't fight, they just sat opposite to each other in the country inn with a beer mug and stared at each other. And you knew one day one would hit the other over the head with it. And they actually got into a fight, and I was there. and everyone watched the event. And finally Siegelhans got Bene under his arm and he squeezed him and he almost choked him. And they pushed him out, they pushed the two out of the bar room into the men's room. And Siegelhans pushed the head of Bene into the urinal, and his eyebrow already had come off. And they tried to stop them, and everyone, all the farmers shouted, "No, let them go on. We gotta know who is the strongest in the village." And Siegelhans was the strongest after all, and they danced on the tables and they played music, and it was obvious Siegelhans was the strongest.
Das traust du nicht. Aber schon wirklich.
What are we when we are in ecstasy or in trance? In Heart of Glass, the actors have played under trance, under real hypnosis. They speak slowly and they stare as if they were all made out of glass, and they look through each other. I've always made films for the audiences without being able to define who they are. I do not have a target group like 15 years old people or like the working class or like the freedom fighters in Algeria. I always had the feeling that my films would work, if not right now, maybe in 20 years or whatever. I think people will get acquainted to my kind of films. articulate dreams or nightmares or hopes or images that are somehow inside of us, of most of us. And very often people can't articulate it, and film is very good for showing us, to give us the inner chronicle of what we are. And my feeling is also that we do have no adequate images for our kind of civilization. Our photos, if you look around in magazines, for example, or postcards, or the posters in a travel agency about the United States, you would see the Grand Canyon picture that you will see everywhere in the world. And these images are not adequate to our situation. And a civilization that does not develop adequate language or adequate images will just fade away like dinosaurs. It's a very, very severe danger we are facing. People don't realize yet we have learned about new dangers that we are facing, like overpopulation, or let's say atomic fission or whatever, or pollution of the world and the entire environment. And we have not understood the graveness of the lack of images. And I'm quite sure we will just die out like some prehistorical dinosaurs. I'm trying and I'm searching, and I never know whether I will manage to find these images, but there are things where I know deep inside that I have come close. For example, the windmills in Signs of Life. There are inner landscapes, and I try to find those landscapes that actually can be directed like people. I like to direct animals, or I like to direct people, but I think you also can direct landscapes to a certain degree. I always say there are so many embarrassed landscapes around in this world, and I'm trying to find a dignified place. With the figure of Caspar Hauser, who has been imprisoned from his earliest childhood, who didn't even know that there were other people around. How does it look to see a tree for the first time ever?
Mich hat geträumt. Du hast geträumt? Was denn? Erzähl doch.
Ja, es hat mich geträumt.
Ich freue mich, dass du Fortschritte gemacht hast. Früher hast du immer geglaubt, alles sei Wirklichkeit, was du geträumt hast. Merkwürdig. Merkwürdig, dass du die ganzen Jahre im Gefängnis nichts geträumt hast.
Mich hat vom Kaukasus geträumt.
Caspar is untouched and he's not bent by society or education. He's just a raw, pure human being. The film also shows that there's no space for that kind of purity. And that's why he's murdered at the end. Caspar Hauser is not an eccentric figure. Everyone else in this bourgeois society looks like a deformed imbecile in comparison to his radical human dignity.
Du Caspar, der Professor ist extra hierher gekommen, um ein paar Fragen an dich zu richten. Weißt du, er will deine Denkfähigkeit prüfen. Er will wissen, was du in diesen 2 Jahren gelernt hast und ob du logisch denken kannst. Willst du ihm noch eine Frage beantworten, ja?
Ja. Gut. Caspar, stell dir vor, hier ist ein Dorf. In dem Dorf leben nur Leute, die die Wahrheit sagen. Hier ist ein anderes Dorf. In diesem Dorf leben nur Leute, die lügen. Von diesem Dorf führt ein Weg auf dich zu und von diesem Dorf führt ein Weg auf dich zu. Und du stehst an der Kreuzung. Es kommt ein Wanderer und du willst wissen, kommt er aus dem Dorf der Wahrheitssager oder kommt er aus dem Dorf der Lügner? Um dieses Problem zu lösen, logisch zu lösen, hast du eine einzige Frage zur Verfügung. Bitte sage mir diese Frage.
Das ist doch für den jungen Herrn viel zu schwierig. Das kann er doch gar nicht wissen.
Ich gebe zu, es ist nicht ganz einfach. Wenn er nämlich simpel fragt, kommst du aus dem Dorf der Wahrheit, dann würde derjenige, der aus dem Dorf der Wahrheit kommt, der Wahrheit gemäß mit Ja antworten. Derjenige aber, der aus dem Dorf der Lüge kommt, würde lügen und ebenfalls mit Ja antworten. Es gibt aber die Möglichkeit einer einzigen Frage, um dieses Problem zu lösen.
Tja, ich finde das alles viel zu schwer, viel zu kompliziert.
Du hast die Möglichkeit, Caspar, mit einer einzigen Frage dieses logische Problem zu lösen.
Ich wüsste es auch nicht.
Caspar, wenn du es nicht weißt, werde ich sie dir sagen. Wenn du aus dem anderen Dorf kämest, würdest du dann mit Nein antworten, wenn ich dich fragen würde, ob du aus dem Lügnerdorf kommst? Über die doppelte Verneinung wird nämlich der Lügner zur Wahrheitsaussage gezwungen. Er wird nämlich über die doppelte Negation zu seiner eigenen Identität bestimmt. Das nenne ich Logik, über Argumentation zur Absolutheit.
Ja, ich weiß eine andere Frage.
Ja?
Es gibt keine andere Frage. Nach den Gesetzen der Logik gibt es keine andere Frage.
Nein?
Doch, ich weiß eine andere Frage.
Dann sag sie uns doch.
Ich würde denjenigen fragen, ob er ein Laubfrosch ist. Derjenige von Wahrheitsdorf würde sagen, nein, ich bin kein Laubfrosch, weil er die Wahrheit sagt. Der vom Lügnerdorf würde sagen, ich bin ein Laubfrosch, weil er gelogen hat. Und daher weiß ich, dass derjenige vom Lügnerdorf kommt.
Nein, nein, das ist keine Frage. Das ist doch nur Darstellung. Das ist doch nicht Logik. Das ist doch nicht das Zusammenfügen
von... verstehe.
Ja, das Verständnis ist doch nicht das Ausschlaggebende. Der Schluss ist doch das Wesentliche. Als Professor der Logik und Mathematik habe ich nicht verstehen gelernt, sondern da habe ich schließen gelernt. Ich kann diese Frage nicht anerkennen.
One has to be very, very careful how we deal with each other. And that's one of the reasons why I hate psychology and analysts. They are a disease of our time. They should be all just put on an aeroplane and flown into an island, and they should, in the Pacific, they should analyze each other, but they should not bother us. Besides, these people, they just come like just boldly as if it was a profession or a science already, and they do not confess that their knowledge is not much more than, let's say, brain surgery during Middle Dynasty in Egypt during the Pharaoh time. So out with them, forget about them. They are disease. They are our disease, and that's exactly because they are too indiscreet. In all my films I have been well organized, but at the same time I try to reduce and battle organization. It is like living in a country, you battle bureaucracy just for survival and keep the life in it. Films are not your property, it's like children. Children are not your private property, and all of a sudden they come to life, and here they are, and they develop their own dynamic, their own character. And probably because I allow so much life to the films, I'm one of the few filmmakers that I know who really likes his own films. One has got a stutter, the other one has got a limp, or the other one is squint-eyed. It's like children, but the more they limp, the more you love them. I'm very fond of my films.
Woyzeck, was setzt er sich so an uns vorbei? Bleib er doch, Woyzeck. Er läuft ja wie ein offenes Rasiermesser durch die Welt. Man schneidet sich an ihm. Er läuft, als hätte er ein ganzes Regiment Kastrierte zu rasieren und würde gehängt überm letzten Haar noch vorm Verschwinden. Aber über die langen Bärte, was wollte ich doch sagen? Die langen Bärte...
Ein langer Bart unterm Kinn? Schon Plinius spricht davon, man müsste es den Soldaten abgewöhnen.
Ja, über die langen Bärte. Wie ist Woyzeck? Hat er nicht ein Haar in seiner Schüssel gefunden? Hey, er versteht mich doch.
Jawohl, Hauptmann.
Ein Haar von einem Menschen. Vom Bart eines Sapeurs, eines Unteroffiziers, eines Tambourmajors. Hey, Woyzeck! Aber er hat eine brave Frau. Geht ihm nicht wie anderen.
Jawohl. Was sollen Sie damit sagen, Herr Hauptmann?
Was der Kerl ein Gesicht macht. Und vielleicht nun nicht in der Suppe, aber wenn er sich eilt und um die Ecke geht, kann er vielleicht noch auf ein paar Lippen eins finden. Ein paar Lippen, Woyzeck. Ich habe auch das Liebengefühl, Woyzeck. Der Kerl ist ja kreideweiß.
I always have felt much closer to artisans of late Middle Ages. Until Michelangelo, sculptors would consider themselves as stonemasons. I also find it fascinating that they were anonymous, but the kind of work that they did and the way they did it with apprentices and with masters and handing it over in a tradition is intriguing for me. The people who are playing here is my soccer team, Munich Black and Yellow und the Sendling. I used to play a lot with them. They're very nice people. Our president is a pastry baker who loves opera and pastry and soccer. But I can't play so well anymore. I had a very, very bad accident on skis. I crashed at a speed of 95 miles an hour and had some very severe neck injuries. And as you can see, the head balls, I don't take any as hard anymore as I used to. But I'll try. So, okay. My favorite English player of all times is Bobby Charlton. The man is a genius who brought soccer back to its very basic simplicity. Nobby styles, what a character he was. Hoddle. If you want to see an earthquake in a stadium, you just go and see him play. Klaus Kinski might be the most difficult man in the world to film with. Probably a little bit like the early Brando, or maybe even Wilder. But one shouldn't look at that. Of course, he's a man who has a tendency towards hysteria, and he's literally paranoid sometimes. But exactly that is his great quality on screen. And you just have to find a way to activate it and make it work for the screen. And the man has a presence and a force on screen that is unprecedented. For me, he's the only genuine genius that is around in the world. As a male actor, there's no one like him. Of course, he has to let his steam off, and I even sometimes provoke it, because I can tell he needs to let the steam off, and then right after that he's perfect, and he's right in the mood to do a scene. But I think nobody really was scared of him, and I'm not scared either. There's something quite unusual going on in between the two of us. Somehow there are forces that are far superior than his own ambitions, will, and his own strength and forces, and far beyond my own strength. Somehow we come together into filmmaking. It was the 4th time now, and it's mysterious. We barely speak. We don't have to explain much. I just tell him, Klaus, for example, I must say I did not like the scene as it was. But now you are gonna turn the pig loose. I did not keep Kinski at gunpoint at the end of the film. but it came close to it. He threatened to leave only 10 days before shooting was finished. And I went to him. He had already packed his things and loaded it on a speedboat. So I said to him, Klaus, very calmly and embarrassed and rather shy, I told him that I had made up my mind. This film was more important than our private feelings, our private life. And I would not like to survive anything like this, a disaster like this. He had to stay to finish the film in dignity. If he left that moment, I would harvest him, I told him. And I told him I had a rifle with 9 bullets. Before he would reach a bend of the next river, he would have 8 bullets through his head, and the last would be for me. The man has instincts, and he understood that it was not a joke. And I told him I had time enough, a year to deliberate. My mind was made up. I told him it doesn't take me 10 seconds of deliberations. I would just do it. And he got scared and he screamed for police. But there was no police post for the next 400 miles around. But we went along fine. He just probably tried to figure out where my borderlines were. Because constantly, day for day for day, I brought him to his borderlines.
We met on an ocean liner going to New York. And after we separated in New York, I waited for him to return. He returned and we got married after 2 years. But we had seen each other only 6 weeks during these 2 years. And then 6 weeks after our marriage, he went to the Sahara. He said he didn't know when he was to return, and I didn't know whether he was to return. I waited several months, and he did return, but he was very sick. And after that, he went to Africa again, and I waited. And he went to Peru, and he went to Guadeloupe, and I waited, and I waited. And when he went to Guadeloupe to film an exploding mountain, I waited for the mountain to explode, and I waited for him to explode with it. And then suddenly, an inward rage seized me, and I said, I'm not going to wait any longer. I shall live now. And I lived. And then when he made this giant work, dragging a big ship over the mountain in South America for 3.5 years, I lived a quiet life at home in Munich. It was not only quiet, it was almost serene. And he came back, and I saw this film on the day of the premiere. And I saw that the film was beautiful. When I'd seen the first film of Werner, I said, he is one of the greatest filmmakers of our time. And when I saw his last film, Fitzcarraldo, I said, he is still one of the greatest filmmakers of our time. And I say it not because I'm his wife, but in spite of being his wife. I say it because I'm detached now. And now, he's going again, going away from me again. But I don't mind anymore. I'm sure he will come back.
I would never demand anything from anyone if I wouldn't be the first one to do it and be with them. Nor do I find it a ridiculous ritual that a captain stays on his boat when it sinks. It is more than a ritual because it gives to his decisions that he has taken before a different quality. And that always has been my position, that you know that the captain will sink with a boat. There's a great mystery about these Stone Age menhirs because they continue right out into the water. And there's a Celtic legend that a prehistorical prince had his lover, a princess, right on this island here. This place here is very much to my liking. I like lonesome spots like this. And it reminds me very strongly to the end of the great ecstasy of the sculpture Steiner, the ski jumper film. At the end, a text appears on screen and it reads, I quote it, "I actually should be all alone in this world, I Steiner and no other living being besides. No sun, no civilization, I naked on a high rock. No snow, no storm, no banks, no money, no time and no breath. Then, at last, I wouldn't be afraid anymore." I always had dreams of loneliness and flying, and I actually and truly wanted to become a world champion of ski flyers, but I abandoned that, and now I've become a filmmaker instead. That's all I can do.